Okay, good morning, everybody, or hello, everyone. Today we are working on single view sketching, and we've gone through the lesson today in class. And so what I want to do is walk through you an example of single view sketching, maybe an example and a half, so that you guys can have success in applying a single view sketch. A couple things that are important is to remember the four-step process that I gave you guys for creating a sketch or an object. And so if you recall, the first step for creating an object is to box it, and then we'll kind of just walk through. But before we do that, let's get a little familiarity with this sheet. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple things and allow you guys to see it. First off, first, the rubric. If you look at the rubric, you can see what's most important within the rubric. The criteria, you've got proportion, clarity, line types, and line weight. And you can see that, you remember when we talked about sketching and the criteria of a sketch, the two most important criteria for a sketch is proportion and clarity. And technically both of these would be 50 points and 50 points, but what I've done is I've broken clarity into two other subcategories, which we talked about previously, which is line types, which we covered last week, and line weight, which we also covered last week. So we'll be emphasizing that throughout our sketch as we go along. So one thing that you have that's set up for you to help you maintain proportion is the grid. And this is, we've referenced on many occasions to this point, beginning from the car sketch. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start you out with A, just briefly, but I'm not going to complete A because A is a very simple drawing. And then I will take you guys to B, because B is a little bit more complex, and I want to spend a little time helping you guys out with B. So first thing that you need to know is, as you know, a single view sketch is a two-dimensional sketch of a three-dimensional object. So we're just keeping that kind of simple in this particular example. If it's two-dimensional, you have two dimensions that are applied, and that is the width, which is on the x-axis, left to right, okay, and the height, which is on the y-axis, bottom to top or top to bottom, okay? And so what we want to do is we want to count that. Now, if it helps you to go ahead and kind of create a box around it, it's not a bad idea, because it makes it easy for you to count the blocks, okay? So I'm going to slightly create a box around it, which is something I'm also going to do here, which is our first step to box the object. So if you count this, count the blocks, or you can count, remember, start from 0 and then count the grid lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can count the blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, either one is just fine to help you to count the blocks. So notice that you're starting at A. We've got point A here, and we've got point A down here. So what we want to do is just count backwards. So I'll go 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, 4 lines, 5 lines, so 5. And right here is my mark. So I'm just going to draw a line out this way. Okay, that's my X, right? Likewise, I'll go ahead. I like to draw my line first typically. This is my Y. I really don't know how far I'm drawing it, but I'll draw it up that way, and then I'll count my blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so likewise, I'll go up 8. So right there was 4, 8 is on up here. I didn't even get my line far enough. Or there I did. So at these points, what I'm going to do is draw a line for the left side, because this is the right side. All right, so from the bottom, I'm going to draw a line up. And then from this point that I've noted or marked, I'm going to draw the top edge. So now you can see my box, okay? And so that defines where my object is going to be in terms of its size as well. So next, I'll start to establish its shape, and so that's where I want to come in, and I want to work out this feature here, and this angular feature here. All right, and so you can kind of come in, count your blocks, and make a mark. You know, in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and make a line at those locations, and then I know that it comes in a block, so I'm establishing my shape, which is the second step. Here, you know, I can go ahead and get this particular feature. Notice I'm making my marks, and then I'm drawing my lines down, and I know that it's 2 in height. Okay, and then if I count here, I can see it's 2 blocks up and 2 blocks over. So I'll just count and make a mark there, and draw a line connecting those two. And then the next step is to add details. There's no details to this particular drawing, meaning there's nothing on the inside, okay? And that's what we consider details. The details are only on the outside, which establishes its shape. So we kind of skip that step because there's nothing for that step, and we move on to the last step, which is to darken. Notice that it's light and it's laid out in construction lines. So I start each drawing in construction lines. All right, let's move on to problem B. Okay, so one thing to note, let me go back to problem A just real quickly. You want to letter in with uppercase Gothic lettering the name of the part. Now typically we would put in, we would put this in what would be called a title block, and we would put with the drawing, we would put the material thickness, which is the third dimension. Remember, these are three-dimensional objects, but we draw them two-dimensionally because they only require one view. So what is an object that would only require one view? Well, I've got a couple examples here to show you, and we'll use them as a basis. So this CD-ROM, if you look at it, and it's basically the same from one side to the other, all right? But it has very little thickness, and because it does, because it's basically the same from the front to the back, then it only needs one drawing, one view to describe it. Okay, let me show you some other things. I'll show you this protractor. Same is true for the protractor. So it's basically the same from the front to the back. Okay, and it's got very little thickness. So if I drew that thickness, all we would see is a line, and that's pretty useless as far as informationally. So all we need is a singular view. Okay. One other thing to show you, and we could go on and on. Okay, here you're seeing a circular template, and again, if we flip it over, it's the same on the other side. So if you notice, it has very little thickness. So because it has very little thickness, and I know that's kind of blurry, then it only requires one view to describe it. Okay, so that's kind of the justification there, and some examples of many examples you could find around your home to describe that. Much like a piece of paper, right? If we look at this piece of paper, okay, it's very little thickness, okay? But if it had no thickness, it would cease to exist. So there's no such thing as a two-dimensional object. All right, moving on. So what I want to do again is to get the dimensions of this object, okay? And if you notice, this one kind of falls in between the grid, all right? So if you count the blocks, many students will count 4 or 5, but it's not either. It's right here in the middle of 4 and 5, so that tells you it's 4.5. So I'm going to make my X. I'm also going to make my Y, and then I'll count over that 4.5. Okay, and make a mark right there. And then likewise, get my height, which is also 8, like the last example. Okay, and I'll go ahead and make my line over. And I'll mark here just to help me, because I don't have a grid to help me here. So maybe I'll put another mark here, but I want to make sure that this is halfway through. Okay, and so now you guys can see my box. Okay, so that's boxing the object, step number 1. Step number 2 is to establish the shape. So there's some shape in a couple of spots. There's this curve here that we want to create. There's this little notch here on this bottom right corner. So those are the parts of the shape. So I'm going to get the notch first. That's going to be easiest to create. And it's either 3 from the top or 5 from the bottom. So I'll just go ahead and sketch that in there. Get that shape established. All right. The next thing I want to do is I want to work out this arc. To work out this arc, I got to find its center point. So anytime you're dealing with holes, circular holes, or circles or arcs, which a circle would represent a hole in most instances, you need to find the center point. And right there is the center point. That's where those two center lines cross. So again, we're bringing back in what we had learned last week about line types. So those lines are very important. So we're dealing with more line types here, okay? And I do want to see your construction lines, so that's important. We're not doing any erasing that we don't need to actually apply. All right, so I'm going to draw those, and if you notice from this corner, okay, and another benefit for boxing this, from this corner it is 2 blocks back and 2 blocks down. So I'm going to go 2 blocks back, which gets me on the half. All right, and I'll go ahead and draw a vertical line, all right, just down through here. All right, likewise, I'll count 2 blocks from the top and draw a horizontal line. Okay, and notice that they intersect right there. So that is my center point. Okay, now to create that arc, if you think back to your techniques from last week, you need to establish a third point. Okay, because we have 2 points, but if we were to connect those two, it'd be more straight than curved. So we create a 45. Okay, and take a scrap sheet of paper or whatever, all right, and man, that distance is pretty close to what I need, but I'm going to go off of a different corner. Okay, so I want to measure. You can see the paper that I've put in there. All right, lift that paper up, and I'm going to transfer that from the vertex of that angle, all right, along that 45 and transfer that mark. And so what I've done there is I've created a third point which I can line up and strike that arc. Now, initially, you might not want to put your pencil to the paper initially, but it's fine too. So there you can see the arc and the establishment of the shape of the object. Okay, so that takes us to our next step, the third step, which is to add details. Okay, so we've got 2 details here. We've got 2 holes, 2 circular holes, and based on their size, we want to get their size so that we can create them. But we also need to know the center point. Notice that the center point of this hole or circle is shared with this arc. They share the same center point, so that's good. So we want to find out its radius. Okay, and we found out the radius of the arc was 2 blocks. Here, the radius of the circle is 1 block. Okay, and it should be consistent because it is a circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and down a block, and to the right and to the left a block. All right, and I'm going to create that square, so I'll just make a line through there. All right, now remember, you've got 2 different methods in which you can kind of create this, a circle. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make my 45s. It's a little bit of a process, but to get it right, this is a great method for doing so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure that radius and transfer that to the other lines. Now, the bigger the circle, the easier this technique works out. This one and also the other one that I taught you. Oops, I should just slide that up here. Okay, and then and the more accurate you guys lay out these marks, the better your circle will be. So you can kind of see that circle already in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here and lightly trace that. You may want to rotate your paper to make it more effective because it is harder to do it the way I'm doing it. It works better if you rotate the paper. So there's one of the holes. You can see that turned out pretty nicely. And then another one, the other one is, if you count the blocks, it's 2 blocks up and 2 blocks over from the bottom left corner. Okay, so I'll just go 2 over, make a mark, 2 up, make a mark, and then just draw lines horizontally and vertically, and right there's my center. Okay, so this one is a 1/2 block wide, which is pretty small. So when it gets to really small circles like this, the technique is very difficult. So what I'd say to do here, again, you can create a light square. Certainly will be helpful to help you maintain proportion. But what I'd say to do here is kind of just, I would not use the technique beyond this reality. I kind of just fake it. Okay, or recognize that let's use the other circle to help us. If you notice that it's about from the vertex or center point to the corner of this square, the distance to the circle is about 2/3. So I would kind of force this out about 2/3. Okay, if you can do that, otherwise you may want to use the technique, but I'm forcing it out about 2/3 from the corner. 2/3 from the center to the corner, and you can see that it ends up being a pretty good circle. Okay, not perfect, but a pretty good circle. And so now we have our details. Now we're ready to darken our object. So I'm going to go ahead and darken my object. Generally speaking, as we noted last week, Arcs and circles are darkened first on a drawing, so I'm going to turn this so I can do this more effectively. Okay, and I'll go ahead and get my circles as well. I apologize if I get this out of position for you guys to be able to see. Okay, bring that on around. Okay, just take your time on these circles. If you take your time, they will turn out really good. All right, and what you want is quality. Okay, so now I'm just going to darken up the rest of the object. Okay. And the key is that you want to make sure that it is neat. So I like to use long continuous strokes. It's okay that the lines intersect each other slightly. You can see that that's a slight intersection on that particular corner there. That's fine. They should always meet, okay? If there are edges, they should meet and be nice and neat. All right. And so that's the object itself. What is missing, there's two things that are missing. One, we have center lines. And so notice the appearance of the center lines. You got a little plus sign in the middle at the center point. And so it's a long line, dash, long line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my dashes in first, just to make it easy for me. I'll go ahead and do that on the bottom hole as well. Okay, and then I'll make my long line. Now this long line extends to the outside of the arc because it relates to the arc and the circle, whereas this long line just extends outside the circle because there's no arc down here. Okay, likewise, this one only extends beyond the circle, and this one extends beyond the arc because it relates to the arc. The arc is just 9 degrees. And so that relationship is important, how you show that. Okay, what I would just do is whatever you see in the image here, in the example, follow that. That's what you should be doing. Okay, so there's the center lines. Last but not least, apply the name, letter the name between the guidelines. And that is a complete drawing. Now, we can render this drawing. Render just means to add color. So we could render this drawing if I can find me a colored pencil. I will do that with you guys. I would like you guys to render one if at all possible. Just need a colored pencil to accomplish that reality. And Mr. Thacker is working on trying to find one. But render means to add color. Okay, so I don't have one, so but to render it just means to add color. I'll render it with a regular pencil, but I would rather do it with a color pencil to see what I'm getting, so you guys can see what I'm getting at. But essentially render means to add color, so it would just be coming in and lightly shading. Now, it shouldn't be so dark that I can't see your construction lines. Okay, and it should be all in the same direction. You certainly can come back in and go other directions as well after going one singular direction to begin with. But the benefit of rendering one of these, I don't want you to render all of them. That's too much work, or more work than I'm asking you to do. But to render it will just help your object to pop off the page. Okay, that's the point of rendering it. And it doesn't look as good in the grayscale as it does if you were to actually use a coloring pencil. So I hope you've got a coloring pencil. If not, you'll need to do it like I'm doing it here. Just render one. It doesn't have to be this one. It can be one of the others. All right. Remember that the circles inside the object represent holes, so you do not want to render the holes. Okay. And that's good enough. Okay, that's pretty good. You want to make sure it's quality. And if you notice, you still see, I can still see my square here. Okay, it's a little bit fainted, but you can see it. Notice that I've not done any erasing. You want to make sure everything is dark that's supposed to be dark. Okay, if you need to go back in and darken it up a little bit more, do so. All right, but you want to make sure your visible lines are dark. Visible lines are your dark lines that represent your details and your shape. And then the center lines represent the center for your arcs and holes. And then there could be other line types. And then you've got your construction lines that I want you to leave. Okay, keep those because I am grading those. And I should see those in your photo. Okay, so much success on the others. So complete all 4. Once you've completed all 4 on S2, move on to S3 and complete the 2 on S3, and then you can move on to S4. Okay, thank you very much. I hope it goes well for you guys. Take care.